Welcome to the historic Ocean House, a luxurious hotel that pays homage to New England's golden age of hospitality. With timeless elegance and renewed civility, this treasured resort is the setting for our special broadcast of the Ocean House Author Series. Each program features nationally best-selling and award-winning authors in a salon-style conversation, hosted by Ocean House owner, actress, and best-selling author Deborah Goodrich Royce. WCRI is pleased to partner with the Ocean House to present this ongoing series, which brings you the best and the brightest of the literary world. Now, let's take you to the Ocean House.
So Liv Constantine is the pseudonym of Lynn Constantine, a New York Times and internationally best-selling author. She is the co-author of The Last Mrs. Parrish, which is a Reese Witherspoon book club pick, and her critically acclaimed books have been praised by The Washington Post and USA Today, among many others, with more than 2 million copies sold worldwide. She has a master's degree from Johns Hopkins University and sits on the board of the International Thriller Writers. Her work has been translated into 29 languages, is available in 34 countries, and is in development for both television and film. When she's not writing, you can find her curled up with her lab and golden retriever reading a good book or binge-watching the latest Netflix series. Her featured book is The Next Mrs. Parrish. She writes with her sisters, whose name is Valerie. Sarah DeVello, the one who's not wearing black because she didn't get the memo, is a true crime novelist and the creator-host of the Mystery and Thriller Mavens author interview series. She also serves as the director of social media strategy for the International Thriller Writers Association. In her spare time, Sarah loves to cook and eat, garden, and go for leisurely walks with her husband and their beloved rescue mutt, Peluda. She runs the Mystery and Thriller Mavens Facebook group, a free online book group where readers can continue the conversation, enter giveaways, request their favorite authors, submit questions in advance, and dish about their latest reads and favorite books. All are welcome, so if you're on social media, you know where to find her. Her featured book is Broadway Butterfly. In the middle is Juliette Grames, the best-selling author of The 7 or 8 Deaths of Stella Fortuna. Her essays and short fiction have appeared in Real Simple, Parade, and the Boston Globe, and she is the recipient of an Ellery Queen Award from the Mystery Writers of America. She is editorial director of Soho Press in New York. Her featured book is The Lost Boy of Santa Quionia. Next, we have Elise Hart Kipnis. She's a former television sports reporter turned crime writer. Her debut mystery, Lights Out, the first in a series, was released in the fall of 2023. In addition to reporting for Fox Sports News, Elise was a reporter at New York's WNBC-TV, News 12 Long Island, New York, and the Associated Press. She is currently co-president of the newly formed Sisters in Crime Connecticut. Graduate of Brown University, she has 2 college-age sons and lives on a hobby farm in Stamford, Connecticut, with her husband, 3 labradoodles, chickens, ducks, and 1 very cantankerous turkey, which maybe she'll tell us more about later. Her featured book is Dangerous Play. Jean Kwok is the New York Times and internationally best-selling author of Girl in Translation and Mambo in Chinatown. Her work has been published in 20 countries and is taught in universities, colleges, and high schools across the world. She has been selected for numerous honors, including the American Library Association Alex Award, the Chinese American Librarians Association Book Award, and the Sunday Times EFG Short Story Award International Shortlist. She received her bachelor's degree from Harvard University and earned an MFA from Columbia University. She is fluent in Chinese, Dutch, and English, most impressive, and divides her time between the Netherlands and New York City. Her featured book is The Leftover Woman. Our panelists will be in conversation with Luann Rice, who is the New York Times best-selling author of 38 novels. 38? Did we lose track? 39. See, every time you turn around, she's written another one, so it's hard to keep up, which have been translated into 30 languages. She received the Connecticut Governor's Arts Award for Excellence and Lifetime Achievement in the Literary Arts category. Several of her novels have been adapted for television, and she contributed a monologue to Motherhood Out Loud, a play that premiered at Hartford Stage Company and was performed off-Broadway and at the Geffen Playhouse in Los Angeles. She is a creative affiliate of the Safina Center. She lives in southeastern Connecticut, is one of our favorite local authors, and her featured book is Last Night. After the discussion, we'll open it up to questions from the audience. If you raise your hand, we're going to walk around with a microphone so we can capture your questions for the radio audience. And now, without further ado, please join me in welcoming Luann and our thriller panel.
Thank you, Sherry. Can everyone hear me? Oh, good. Thank you so much, Sherry, and everyone from Bank Square Books, and Lauren, and the Ocean House for having us here, and especially Deborah, who isn't here, but for a really happy reason. She just had her second granddaughter. So, and I feel really honored that she asked me to fill in for her, because they're very big shoes to fill. Many of you who've been here before know that. But I feel it actually feels really easy because I love these authors, I love their books, and I'm loaded with questions, and I'm sure you will be too afterwards. But let's start with asking each author to give us just a thumbnail of what the book is about or what inspired it, just something to give us an idea of what we have to look forward to. Jean, would you like to start?
Sure, yeah. Can you guys hear me? Hi. Well, thank you all so much for coming, and indeed we're so grateful to everyone and to the bookstore and to Ocean House for having us. My book is The Leftover Women, and it is about two mothers, two worlds, and one impossible choice. It's about what happens when a young woman in China gives birth and is told shortly afterwards that her baby had died. And she grieves, but she finds out a few years later that her daughter had not died, but had been placed for adoption by her no-good husband. That's my favorite part of the summary. Her no-good husband had placed their daughter for adoption, like another casualty of China's one-child policy that only allowed one kid, and he wanted a boy instead of a girl. And when the novel opens, she has followed her daughter to New York City to try to get her back.
Elise?
Hi, thank you everyone also, and to Deborah and to Luann. I'm so excited to be here with you. So Dangerous Play is the second book in the Kate Green series, and as a former sports reporter, my main character is a way cooler version of me, and a former sports reporter who's also an Olympic gold medalist, so way cooler than I am.
You were just a silver medalist.
Yeah. It was so embarrassing. And she's trying to redeem herself because she's coming off of a big suspension, and she gets assigned to cover the Olympics in New York City and cover her sport of soccer. And she happens to know some of the people involved, like the head coach of the women's soccer team, who she knew as a youth player. And then they discover a dead body in the locker room, and it's someone from her past. So she sort of has to go back into her past and expose secrets that she and other people at the Olympics would rather keep buried. So,
I'm Juliette Grames. I know there's some familiar faces in the room, so thank you if you've already heard me talk about The Lost Boy of Santa Chionia. This book is set in 1960 in the deep south of Italy, where my grandmother was born. And the main character is a 27-year-old, very idealistic American charity worker who is there to open up a nursery school for underprivileged children when a flood washes down the village post office and reveals a human skeleton. So the story is her very ill-advised investigation into the identity of these bones.
Hi everybody, I am so happy to be here. My book, Broadway Butterfly, is about the murder of a scandalous flapper in 1923 named Dot King, who was found murdered in her bed wearing a lacy negligee that barely reached her knees. And that is only the first of many titillating facts that, as the investigation unfolds and reveals a crazy cast of characters that goes from the Broadway underworld all the way up to the White House. And you read this book, which is told through 4 points of view: the detective who investigated it, the sassy Jewish reporter from Memphis, Tennessee, who covered the case, the closest friend of the victim, and a society woman. And you get to the end, and then in my author's note, I reveal that it's all 100% true.
Wow. Incredible.
Hi, everybody. I am here representing Liv as half the sister team. Thank
The
you.
better half.
Right, well, don't tell my sister that. So we don't have any dead bodies. My book is The Next Mrs. Parrish. It is the sequel. It can be read as a standalone, but it is the sequel to The Last Mrs. Parrish, which is about the one percenters in an upscale town in Connecticut, and a woman named Amber is trying to worm her way into the life of her best friend, Daphne. So Daphne, I can't say too much without spoilers if you haven't read the first book, but when we get into the second book, Daphne is in jeopardy. There's a terrible husband in it, as there should be. And so there's a lot of double crossing, and I think the best way to describe it is sort of Dynasty meets Dallas. That would be, right.
Well, those were great. I'm going to jump around, but I'm going to start with you, Lynn, because
Okay.
Just a couple things that you said. First of all, it takes place on the Connecticut shoreline,
Yes.
Bishop's Harbor.
Yes.
So I want to ask you, because we have a lot of Connecticut residents here, I'd like to ask you a little bit about that and where you imagine it set. And also just the dynamic. I loved how it's so many secrets in that very alluring and seductive town. So
Sure. So when we sat down to write the book, you know, the great wealth in this book, in both books, is almost a character in and of itself. And it's not always a flattering view of that. And so I won't say what town it's supposed to be, but I did live in Westport for 10 years. And we didn't want to offend anybody, even though I loved Westport. Don't get me wrong, it's beautiful. I'm in Milford now. You know, I love all of the towns in Connecticut, and I have many wonderful friends in Westport. So, but you know, this is sort of that whole thing where, you know, Amber is annoyed because she sees a receipt from Daphne that she got a $70,000 Prada bag, and she's thinking, wow, that's like almost what I make in a year. And so, you know, that really becomes a part of and it's really more about how what we may envy or aspire to is not always what it's cracked up to be. So, you know, it's that whole thing of what goes on behind closed doors, and what may look perfect, like the perfect golden couple, and everything is, you know, isn't that way, and there are secrets. And so it was really a lot of fun to write, and you know, Googling all these things, we still get things from Realtor.com offering us like $30 million houses. Thanks a lot, yes. So we're not living that lifestyle, but it's a really fun lifestyle to write about, and the characters. And you know, in Daphne, our main protagonist did not grow up in that world. But in the new book, we also brought Dallas in, which that was a lot of fun. So we have a new character, Daisy Ann, and that's the whole Dallas society. And a funny thing is that we wrote about a couple places in Dallas, and this one was, and I should remember the name of the store where she bought these great boots. And we got the owner of that store reached out to us and sent us the boots because they were so flattered. I mean, and they're like $2,500 boots. We were like, wow, yeah. And then this other place,
I know, right? To sell.
Right? I know. Who knew? None of the Connecticut things people reached out to us. So then this other store, Silva and C, Amber buys this 10-table ring from this store, from this jewelry designer. And they reached out to us, and they just flew my sister to Dallas to do a signing at a trunk show for the jewelry store. Yeah, it was amazing.
Next book definitely set in time.
I am taking.
So a little glimpse of that, yeah. So it's a lot of fun. I mean, I feel like we do also get into thematic issues of, you know, there is. Again, I can't say too much, but there is forgiveness, there's justice, there is revenge, there's there's friendships, broken trust, trauma, and overcoming that, and a lot of family issues. But it's set in a very fun environment, if that makes any sense.
it really is. Now I'm thinking about product placement in my
Yeah,
life.
Birkin bag.
Yeah. The most that happened to me was going to the Mystic Museum of Art.
Right.
And
Free pass.
And the curator said, "Thank you for mentioning us."
Right. Didn't even give you a pass or anything, right? No.
Jean, I'd love to ask you about your book is so beautiful and so wrenching. The emotion in it was beautiful, and because the characters are so full and so rich, and the two women, I don't want to give anything away, but the two women who love, I won't say it because I'll let you, but also the dastardly husband. That's what really caused a lot of suspense, was his tracking Jasmine and trying to stop her, really. But what did inspired you in that to write those characters?
Right. So, in the Leftover Women, it's about one child and two moms who both really love that child. And one is the biological mother, Jasmine, who's come to New York to really get her kid back. And then the other mom is Rebecca, who is a high-powered publishing executive. And Rebecca is wealthy in her penthouse apartment and with her handsome husband and a beautiful home and an adopted Chinese daughter that she adores. And what I wanted to do in the book was I wanted you to love both moms. Like, I did not want it to be like, oh, Jasmine should get the child or Rebecca should get the child, because actually I think they both really have a right to the child. And some people have adopted kids and they're like, will your book break my heart? I'm like, no, not at all. Because I actually identify very much with Rebecca as well. Like, Rebecca went to Harvard. She's like so many of us. She's a high-powered woman who's trying to juggle so many balls in the air. Like, I remember when my first kid was born, I was on an airplane with my husband. My husband changed the baby's diaper, and it was like the second coming. And the flight attendants were like, oh, what a clever man! He changed the baby's diaper! They almost stood and sang in chorus. And I'm like, I have also changed the diaper once or twice. And everyone was like, nobody cares, And I feel like as a woman, our standards are so high for ourselves, and people judge us so harshly, and that's what Rebecca's kind of trying to do. But on the other hand, Jasmine's child was taken away from her without her knowledge, without, she's oppressed, and they're dastardly hot men, and they're nice hot men. There are a lot of hot men. I have to say, I did have an editor who was like, do all your male characters have to be so hot? And I'm like, yeah. Why not? Yeah. Have you seen what celebrities date? It's we have a right. We have a right. So anyway, so the book is told from these two points of view. And I'm kind of hoping that people will be Team Jasmine, Team Rebecca, Team Jasmine, Team Rebecca, and then you have this impossible choice, and how it's going to work out. So.
Gina, I don't think you should ever have to apologize for hot men.
Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah, I agree.
I approve. Sarah, so fascinating, first of all, historic, and the Broadway world. So I want to ask you, among other things, how you know about that and whether you've been in it or around it. And to me, it is such a compelling thriller and such a compelling mystery. It felt to me like the East Coast answer to the Black Dahlia, to Los Angeles' most famous murder, and maybe in the same period too. So anyway, I'd love to hear about Broadway and New York City and your research.
Well, thank you, Luann. I'm going to get the East Coast answer to Black Dahlia tattooed on my face, because that is #goals. And I actually share an editor with James Elroy, who wrote the Black Dahlia. That was James. I wanted to evoke that feeling. So thank you.
Well done.
So my research took me 10 years. And it took me from the dusty archives of the New York Public Library, where I had to work with microfilm because the archives were not digitized, to pull all of Julia Hartman's articles. She was the lead reporter at a time when less than 20% of women worked outside the home, and that 20% primarily worked in domestic service as shop girls or as telephone operators or in factories. Women did not really work outside the home, and those who did worked in those. She was a reporter, and the very, very, very few women that were reporters covered the so-called ladies' pages, which was what you're wearing, who you're dating, who you're marrying, who's having the parties. And she was the lone woman who was a crime reporter and was throwing elbows with the guys, and quickly rose to be not just the lead female reporter, but the lead crime reporter. And the men at the New York Times were racing to keep up with her. And she was one of the 5 pioneering women of journalism at the turn of the century, and a name that all of us should know, that should be taught in every history of journalism class and as every pioneering women's class. But she's a name that nobody knows because time has forgotten her. And so unearthing her story was so amazing and such a privilege, and then getting to unearth all of her articles in those dusty archives was amazing. I amassed over 1,800 pieces of research pieces, and my research also took me to presidential libraries, to professors at 12 different colleges and universities, all of whom I thank in the acknowledgments, and even to a psychic who works with the FBI on cold cases. And it turns out that that's a thing. The FBI uses psychics to solve cases that they cannot solve, which I did not know and could never have guessed. But I found her, or rather, she found me, which was very bizarre. She said, "Are you working on a cold case?" Yes. How did you know? And I hired her to work with me to try to solve this and to find it. And so that was how the many ways that I immersed myself in this story, in this world, in the 1920s, and to learn the stories of these real people in this crazy, twisty case.
Oh, wow. That's fascinating.
It was really fun.
It felt, the research was seamless. It felt, the story just flowed. To know that you did all of that, I mean, you really, absorbed it. But I want to tell a tiny little vignette. When you said the psychic, I worked with a psychic once on a book a long time ago. And she was from Norwich. Her name was Pat Gagliardi. I don't know if any of you had ever heard of her, but she worked with the Connecticut State Police.
Yes, this is a thing.
It was, and she at one point she saw a missing child in a pond. At another point she saw a kidnapped victim in a particular car going over a hill. Yeah. Well, anyway, she said, "Let me do a reading for you. Give me a piece of your jewelry." And so she took my watch and she held it. And then she gave it back to me and said, "I'm not going to do a reading for you."
Oh, God! Oh, my God! Oh, that is chilling.
I know. I never knew why.
I'd be like, take it now.
If I actually have a psychic story as well. Just quick digression. Yeah. My second book is called Searching for Sylvie Lee, and it's based on the real life disappearance of my brother. Oh. And my brother had. So what happened was this famous psychic moved into a office across from my gym, and I was kind of like, it's $100, I'll just see. And he had just passed away. I had not tweeted, I had not written about it. I made the appointment with only my cell phone number, which nobody has, and my first name, because I was just like, I didn't want to be scammed. I thought, let's just go in and see what happens. I went in, she looked at his picture, and she said, and he was young when he died, young, not like an old man, like he was a younger person. And she was like, he died in an accident, which was true. She was like, he was alone in the car, and he was in the wilderness. And then she frowned, and she was like, it's really weird. I said, what is it? And she said, I'm seeing all the trees from above somehow. And my brother had died in an airplane crash. She assumed he was alone in the wilderness because she saw it, but he was piloting the plane. And so it was just so incredible to have that.
Wow.
So, Luann, did you? I'm sorry. Did you press her for anything after she said that, or did you?
I did to a point. She, at one point she said. I forgot, before she said, I'm not going to do the reading, she held the watch and then she said, do you have a silver car in your life? And I didn't, but the person I was involved with and was soon to marry did have one, and a silver Volvo. And that's when she said, I'm not going to do a reading for you. Oh. And I thought, something's going to happen to Henry, but nothing ever did.
Oh, thank God. Knock on wood.
That's horrible.
Well, we did get divorced, but...
That was it.
That was because we hadn't married yet. So.
Well, I was really suspicious. I was very skeptical of psychics.
Me
but
too.
she had me write down a list of questions. She said, "Who do you want to talk to?" And I said, "I want to talk to the victim," and say, "Who killed you?" You know. And so she said, "Write down all the questions. Don't show it to me. Fold it and put it in your pocket. Don't tell me anything about them." So I wrote down 10 questions. Number 10 was who killed you, because it seemed rude to lead with that. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to be too forward. And I folded it up and I put it in my pocket, and I walked out of the session and I opened it, and she had answered every single question in the order I had written them down.
Wow.
I mean, it was crazy. I was like, I guess I'm a believer now. Yeah.
We'll take a short break and be back with the Ocean House Author Series here on WCRI.
The cold and blustery days of winter, when New Englanders are holed up with nowhere to go and nowhere to be, are the perfect time to curl up with a good book. If you or someone in your life that enjoys whiling away the hours by getting lost in the pages of a novel, why not present them with a book by hotelier, actress and nationally best-selling and award-winning author Deborah Goodrich Royce. Start with Deborah's latest thriller, Reef Road, a Publishers Weekly, Good Morning America, and American Booksellers Association pick. This true crime-inspired novel of suspense and high society in Palm Beach probes unhealed generational scars and a wrenching and original work of fiction. To learn more about the fascinating life and times of the author and her other page-turning mysteries, Finding Mrs. Ford and Ruby Falls, visit DeborahGoodrichRoyce.com.
And we're back with the Ocean House Author Series on WCRI.
Well, do either of you have a psychic story? No?
I do not.
Well, I think we'll go to Elise. We're sort of leapfrogging here. So Elise, you were a sports reporter, and this is your second novel about Kate Green. I
Right.
love your Kate Green novels. I'm glad
Thank
it's
you.
a series with a third to come,
Yeah.
right? So it's such a good crime solver, but bad things happen to her.
They do, yeah.
And so tell us a little bit about your own experience and how you created Kate, and then why these things happened to her.
Yeah, so before I was a sports reporter, I was a news reporter, and I worked at NBC, and I covered a lot of crime. And so I think the reason I ended up in this genre was because I had observed so much trauma, from like the Joel Rifkin serial murder trial to the Long Island Railroad shooting to covering Flight 800 crash for a month at a time, a month. But you're an observer as a reporter, and it's like not your place to feel the emotion. Like you can help how you feel, but it's someone else's tragedy and it's someone else's stuff. And I remember my mom once saying to me, like, "You're always depressed," and like, yeah, people are dying every day, So that was like bubbling in the back of my head. And then I went to sports, and it was like, yay, you win, you lose, like, get over it, it's fine. But also, it was very hard to be a woman in the news business and the sports business. But in the, I'm thinking about your person you were talking about, like, I was one of, every station had a female on camera, but the 40 other people in the background were men, like there were maybe one or two others. So we were a real minority there. And it was back in the day when I think a lot of us felt like we were just happy to be in the game and didn't stick up for ourselves and just sort of took it. And so Kate, I'm like just living vicariously through her, because in the beginning of the first book, she doesn't take it, and she gets suspended for that, but she just talks back and sticks up for herself when someone calls her a bad mom. And And people were like, did that happen to you? And I'm like, no, but I wish I had done that like 1,000 times. So she's just so much stronger than I was, and I'm like able to stand up to the slights and the bullying and the ignoring and the like, you know, sexism and all of that through her. So it's really fun.
I think that's what I meant really when I said, because she is feisty.
Yeah.
And she puts herself out there.
Yeah.
And so I think she's kind of a magnet for a lot of incidents, you know?
Yeah. And she does. She steps right into it, and she doesn't shy away from things, and she has a strong sense of justice and wants to go out there and help people, improve people. Like, trust is a big issue for her. And and in Dangerous Play, redemption, because she feels she had done something that she feels very guilty about from her past as a teenager, because there's so much pressure in youth sports, and that's something that I really explore in Dangerous Play. It's a dual timeline, so you see Kay playing at the highest level of soccer, at the national team level as a 14-year-old, 15-year-old, and the pressures and the decisions that these kids are making and the trauma it can cause to them, 20 years later, and that really ties into the actual murder, possibly, that happens, but it definitely is there as a thread, and Kate doesn't hide her head the second time. Come what may, she goes out and faces it.
She does. Something you said earlier about being a reporter and witnessing so much devastation and violence, and then, as you said, but it's someone else's story. But as a reporter, you must have internalized a lot of trauma, I would think. And I guess, would the station ever help you? Would there be a counselor? Would there be any kind of treatment? No.
I mean, I don't think they would even consider it. It's not even that. They're like, there was a saying back then, if it bleeds, it leads.
Yeah, right. Still a saying.
Dan Rather said that when news started to make money, it became entertainment. So it's such a logical question. I know it would be more like, they got the victim to talk, how come you didn't get them to talk? Or why aren't they crying on your film and they're crying on this film? It was very callous. It was really, like I have a lot more books in me because I have a lot more things to work out in my brain, of the stuff. But my mom, who is a social worker, she wasn't being like negative when she said you're depressed. She's like, it was more like, let's examine this, because your day isn't like everyone else's day, and what you're seeing isn't like everyone else's. And
like you're being seen.
Yeah.
I think one reason I asked is I've been following the Delphi murder trial of, I don't know if you've been following that case, but 2 young girls were murdered in Delphi, Indiana, and the person who's been accused is on trial right now, and there is a jury. And the evidence, the exhibits are very graphic and very terrible for these little girls, 14-year-old girls. And one of the questions was, how will the jury take this? Like, will they need help? Because, you don't think about that. You're called for jury duty. You're a normal, ordinary person. You haven't chosen it. And suddenly you're faced with this dreadfulness. Which brings me to Juliet.
Dreadfulness.
Well, it is a segue that I hadn't planned. But,
well done, though. Well done.
So Juliet, I love your book, as you know. Juliet, at and I have had the pleasure of speaking about her book before.
Luann actually interviewed me for my launch
Yeah.
this year, which was very generous of her.
Yeah.
So,
And I'm hoping that your mother's in the audience so she can sing the song.
you know, not today.
Oh, darn it.
Not today.
But
Sing
no,
a song now?
Yeah,
Yes,
I wanna hear about
my
that.
mom. So I'm Italian. It's, you know, the gestures. It means I go everywhere with my mother, and sometimes I've done like 38 events for this book this summer. I think she's been at least 16 of them. Sometimes she'll pop up in the back, and yeah. So when I see her, I make her sing with me.
Yeah.
That's her penalty.
yeah, maybe one of us will have to. But no, so it's such a fascinating premise, and a young American woman goes to a very rugged rural town in southern Italy, in Calabria, and she is suddenly confronted with trauma, with something absolutely terrible. And she, again, like the jury, she's a normal girl who's there for a particular reason, and then this happens.
Yeah. So I'm very passionate about Italy. I love writing about Italy. I want to say happy Italian American Heritage Month to those who celebrate. And anyone in the room, if you don't personally identify as Italian, I want to remind you that we do accept converts. So you can see me after. I'll give you the meatball recipe. Okay. But yeah, you know, my Italian grandparents came from the south of Italy, and I'm especially passionate about telling that story because it's not written about. People don't talk. You know, you go to Rome, you go to Florence, you go to Venice. Those are great places, but most Italian Americans come from the south, which is beautiful and full of history and ignored. So I just love, I love writing about that place. My first book was about Calabria. My second book actually came out of my first book when I was doing over 100 interviews with members of the Italian diaspora. And I was just trying to learn what life was like in the old country. But what I got again and again and again is this, I call it the lost boy phenomenon. And this is when I hear a story about an uncle, grandmother's brother, or cousin who sailed away to the New World looking for opportunity and then who was never heard from again. Like that's the end of the story. And you people show me these photos and they're like, well, this was my cousin Antonio and he sailed for Argentina in 1915 and we're not sure, do we have cousins in Argentina? Or, you know, it's heartbreaking because this is the thing at the end of the day. I got one of these lost boys in my own family. We thought he had died in a mining accident in West Virginia, and we found out later that he had been murdered by his best friend. And you know, my husband has one in his family where his great grandfather just disappeared. And it's thought that he ran away with another woman and stole all the family's money. But he could easily, he was a shop owner. He could easily have been the target of an organized criminal hit. This was in Boston at the turn of the century. So I mean, life for Italian immigrants, for any immigrants, but I've specialized in this diaspora, it was dangerous, and it leaves this heartbreak story of like, what happened to these missing guys? Should we be mourning them? Should we be mad at them? And you can't know. And I thought, hey, that's a crime novel. Yeah, that's a crime novel.
It is. And your character, Francesca, she's a brave character too. And one thing I think is fascinating about her, she goes to she's in this very small mountain village, excuse me, and in some ways she seems to care about solving the murder more than anybody else in the town does.
Well,
what is that about?
Yeah, well, this is the thing about a village. If you've lived in a village, you know you rely on the people in this village for the rest of your life. So you know, you may love them, you may hate them. It doesn't matter. Tomorrow you're going to get up. You're drawing water from the same well. So your grudges may fester for 100 years, or you know, you may be in love with someone and you can't say it because they're married to your brother, and it's just, and everyone is family. And here's the thing. The Italian village is a great metaphor for all the villages we make in our lives in general. But you know, having Francesca as an American interloper, suddenly when she's there, some of the people who have been keeping these secrets for one another, maybe they're using her as an agent of exploding some of those problems for themselves. So, you know, yeah, she's brave. Maybe she's also a little bit headstrong about getting involved in things she shouldn't be getting involved in, letting the sleeping dogs lie.
Like all writers.
I don't know.
Like all
writer,
of us.
yeah, totally.
Yeah. I know we have a little more time for us to be talking, and then we'll ask for questions. But first of all, two things for each of you. Is there anything else you would like to say about the book or about writing in general? I guess that's a question I'd like to know. How did you each come to writing? We could go down the line. You want to start, Lynn?
Sure. I mean, I guess being a reader is what got me into being a writer more than anything. And years ago, I said to my sister, we were reading a lot of books about ethnic families, and we're Greek. And I said, there really isn't a book about Greek families. And none of my siblings, including myself, married Greek men or women. And my grandmother had passed. And so I knew that my children wouldn't have the same connection to that world that I did. And so we wanted to leave a legacy for them. So we wrote a book called Circle Dance about two sisters. Wasn't autobiographical, even though there were some similarities. And of course, a lot of the people were like family members. And that sort of got us into it. And then I moved. And a number of years went by, and I began to write again. And so then, of course, my sister had to copy me and get in on the act. And so I wrote a book independently, and then we just started collaborating together. But I mean, I've always loved to tell stories. I just remember as a child playing with the dolls, and the maid was pregnant by the husband over here, and all this kind of crazy stuff. So it was a natural progression. Yeah. I'll pass it along to you on that note.
I'll be thinking about your pregnant Barbies.
Right.
I was also a voracious reader, and I was a little girl who wanted to be a writer from the time that I realized that I could be. I grew up in a very, very poor family, and a family that couldn't afford books. So we went to the library every 2 weeks, and we would fill our grocery bags with books, and it was the best day of the month to go there and just fill them up. And to be able to have the chance to walk through other worlds and other perspectives and other people's shoes through the pages of that book. And that enriched me and filled me and made me have a lifelong love of reading. And then I think around 8 years old, I realized that those library books did not just appear on those shelves, but that someone had written them. And I longed to be one of those people, but I did not feel that I could be because people like me weren't. And so I went to college. I was the first one in my family to go to college. I worked my way through, and I came out and I got a very responsible job to pay back my student loans. And I worked in the corporate world for 14 years. And then finally, I realized, if not now, then when? My mother was diagnosed with terminal breast cancer and had 6 months to live, and I suddenly thought, oh my God, how long do any of us have? I could have 6 months, I could have 6 days, I could have 6 hours, I could die on the drive home. And if I don't do it now, what will my life be if I don't do the one thing that I've always longed to do? And so I gathered my courage, and I saved my money, and I quit my job, and I wrote my first book. And I've never looked back, and I'm so grateful for the opportunity.
Also, you can see Sarah is also Italian because she's very good at talking with her hands. And if you want, we can give you lessons in that later.
I'm the same way.
Yeah.
It's a great thing. It's
Real Greeks, you're practically Italian.
Yeah.
It's okay. You can pass. Am I up?
Yes.
Yeah. So it's
Yes,
funny.
you are.
I know I seem like I'm branding heavily here, but actually, my writing is very much linked to my immigrant background. And when I was 5, my grandmother had a cerebral trauma that ended up in a lobotomy, and so and she went on to live another 30 years. And if you want to know more about what happened to her, I have fictionalized her life story in my first novel, The Submarine Tales of Stella Fortuna. She had a wild life story, but I was 5, and I was already aware that her story was weird when this happened, when she survived this miracle. And that was when I first started trying to write things down. I was like, somebody's got to write this down. And so my dad was a computer engineer, so we had early tech. I'm 42, so for my age to have a computer in your room when you're 4 years old, it was unusual. We had Amiga. I don't know if you remember that. Wow. And I'd sit there on the word processor, and I tried to write a book called An Italian Girl that was about her. It was about my grandmother, and it didn't work out. And I, like Sarah, I realized I needed to make money, so I thought, I love books so much. What can I do to make books if I'm not going to write them? I became a book editor, and I still do that. But then after doing that for about 10 years, I realized my grandmother's story was still nagging at me, and that's when I sat down to write it. And now I try to do both things, which is why my books come out 5 years apart. Thank you for your patience.
That's so funny. So I didn't initially think about writing. I remember when I was, I think in 5th grade, and I read a book about Edward R. Murrow, and I wanted to be a reporter, and I wanted to stand up again. There's a theme there, stand up for what's right, and my whole life was I was driven to be a reporter, and then I had kids later, and I had been traveling a month at a time. I'd go to spring training for a month in Florida, or I'd go, to cover March Madness for a month. So I was really traveling. And so when my first son was born, I decided to stop. I wanted to be around. And after about 5 years, what surprised me was the thing I missed was writing. And I only wrote this big story, because they're short. You only had a minute to tell your stories. But I missed writing, and I did find a journal entry from my 20s that said, "I wish I had more time to do what I love, write." So it was there, and then the first draft I wrote was terrible. I wrote it as a reporter. I told the who, what, where, when, why. There was no suspense. There was no misdirection, and it took me a while to make that transition. But yeah, and I love it, and I love it more than what I did. But I love that I can go back to what I did from bed without doing my hair, without putting on makeup, without standing on a box, because I'm very small, and I would stand on a box to interview people. So, yeah.
Yeah, well, I think like everybody else up here, I started with a real love of reading, but I did not know that you could be a writer. I didn't know it was a choice, because like Sarah, I was incredibly poor. I was born in Hong Kong. We moved to the US when I was 5 years old, and we were so poor that we lived in an unheated apartment in New York City. So the windows were covered with ice on the inside. There was radiators, but they didn't work. And it was overrun with rats and roaches. And the only heat we had was actually the stove, which we turned on and left open day and night. So to make things worse, my parents and my brothers started working in a factory, a clothing factory, a sweatshop in Chinatown. And even though I was only 5, I went along to help as well. Wow. So, all my homework, everything was done on the subway or during breaks at the factory. And then to make things even worse, I was a girl and the youngest of 7 children, in a very traditional Chinese family where the hierarchy is based on age and gender. So as the youngest of 7 children and a girl, guess where I was? So on top of not speaking English and doing terribly at school, I was like a terrible, terrible Chinese daughter. And, it would be like, go make dumplings. I would burn the tablecloth, it'd be like, sweep the floor. And the floor would be very, very dirty. And, I was just so not competent as a Chinese daughter. And my brothers, I come from a really traditional family where it was boys were better. There was just no question about it. It was we want boys. And, when my brother got married, a male relative rolled over the marriage bed to bring forth sons. And I wasn't allowed to look at my brothers or my father in the eye because that was disobedience, let alone actually speaking up. So there were like a lot of issues when I was growing up, and it was clear that I had two life paths. I could either stay in the factory my entire life, which is what most people did. You entered as a child and you exit as an old woman doing the least well-paid jobs. Or I could find some poor man willing to marry me, and my family despaired of this option. Like, they would have meetings where they were like, nobody's ever gonna want her. Like, how are we ever gonna get rid of her? Because I was like so bad at being a Chinese girl. And I knew that these were like my two paths in life. And I was like, thought from a very young age, like, what am I gonna do? Like, am I gonna work at the factory till I'm an old lady? Or am I going to try to convince some guy to marry me and then bear him sons, clean for him, cook for him, take care of him, do all the stuff that I was already really bad at? And I thought long and hard about it, and I thought, I'm going to go to Harvard instead. Woo! Thank you. And actually, and that's what I did. So I knew from the time I was 7 years old that I had my eyes on the prize, and that was where I was going. But I did go to Harvard. Big story jump here, but I went in as a physics major, and I was like, oh God, the namby-pamby artsy stuff. Like, it was not in my multiple choice list of what to do with your life. Didn't even know you could be a writer, you know. But so I went in as I skipped a year when I went in. I went in as a sophomore in physics, ready to like go and rule the world in physics. And then one night I was up late, like working on a problem set. And I wrote a poem, and I was like, oh my God, what is that? Like, it was like, I felt like I laid an egg. You know, I was like, what the hell? I'm sorry. I was like, oh my God. You know, so, but somehow, like, from that moment on, it was like all I wanted to do. And I think my books are very much about women and culture and family. And in The Leftover Women, and also Searching for Sylvie Lee, which was a Today Show book pick, is a lot about being a woman in a world like this.
Yes.
So.
Yes. Your family must be very proud of you now.
Not really, no. I mean, kind of, you know. I mean, well, I will tell you one thing, which is that in between my degrees I did my MFA at Columbia. And in between my degrees at Harvard and Columbia, I worked for 3 years as a professional ballroom dancer in New York City. Yeah, and like I might have told my mother that I was working as a computer specialist in those years. And then like there was an interview about me on the front page, because my mom never learned to speak English, and so I could get away with a lot of stuff like that. And then there was an interview with me on the front page of the biggest Chinese newspaper in America, and she was like, "You did what?" And I was just like, "Oh, I'm so sorry." So it's busted, yeah.
That's the problem with publicity. You want it, but then you get it, and then your family finds out the truth.
Exactly.
Oh, wow. That all of you, it's so moving to hear, and I'm glad it's going to be Q&A, because I'm in tears, honestly.
Yeah.
That was really...
We already have our first one.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, my book?
Yeah.
Yes.
Oh.
Yes.
Oh, gosh. Well, it's called Last Night, and it takes place here at the Ocean House. It's about two artists, so it's two sisters who are artists, and one of them is staying here, running from a bad marriage with her daughter, and she takes a walk in a blizzard and goes down to the path to East Beach that's right next to our neighbor Taylor's house, and she gets murdered. And so it's who, and it's, you know, as Deborah calls it, a closed room mystery, because it all takes place here in the hotel during the blizzard when nobody can escape. And so, you know, and who done it? Was it the bartender? Was it
Brian?
Was it Brian? Oh no! And actually, the only person And I will say he didn't do it, but the only, and I love the Ocean House. It's my home away from home. But the only staff member whose name I did use in real life was Brian, who's the bartender in the club room.
He told us last night.
Did he? He's a character.
Yeah,
he's great.
We'll take a short break and be back with the Ocean House Author Series here on WCRI.
The cold and blustery days of winter, when New Englanders are holed up with nowhere to go and nowhere to be, are the perfect time to curl up with a good book. If you or someone in your life that enjoys whiling away the hours by getting lost in the pages of a novel, why not present them with a book by hotelier, actress and nationally best-selling and award-winning author Deborah Goodrich Royce. Start with Deborah's latest thriller, Reef Road, a Publishers Weekly, Good Morning America, and American Booksellers Association pick. This true crime-inspired novel of suspense and high society in Palm Beach probes unhealed generational scars and a wrenching and original work of fiction. To learn more about the fascinating life and times of the author and her other page-turning mysteries, Finding Mrs. Ford and Ruby Falls, visit DeborahGoodrichRoyce.com.
And we're back with the Ocean House Author Series on WCRI.
But anyway, I think it's time for Q&A. I see Sherry and Kate. Oh yes, hello, you're there too. So who would like to start?
You're going to be sorry. You're going to go home and you're going to be like, I should have asked my question.
Oh, good.
Yes.
I was just wondering where your sister is. Does she not typically do?
The question is, where's
Where's your sister? Is she missing? Right. Oh, I have a book idea. Two best-selling sisters. Yes. One goes missing.
We do normally do events together, especially when we're on tour. But she was in Dallas. Remember, because the shoes, with the
boots.
Oh, the jeweler.
The jeweler this weekend. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
And we have
and somebody and here too.
So.
Yes.
Okay. Let's see. So for Sarah, I was really curious, 10 years to research a book, which sounds to be common sometimes. I listened to a podcast with Elizabeth Gilbert, and she says that when inspiration or a story wants to be told, it finds you. But if you don't produce it in a certain amount of time, it will find another artist or author.
Yes.
Were you ever nervous that in 10 years someone else would come up with a same or similar story?
Yes. So I watched that same TED Talk, and the threat of my story, which did find me in the most extraordinary way, because I was working on it. I was 30,000 words into another story, and it found me in Philadelphia when I was home for Thanksgiving. And the threat that if I wasn't working fast enough, it would go find another teller hung over me daily, because I first thought it would take me 1 year, and then I thought, oh my God, it's taking me too long. It's going to leave me and go to someone who's faster. And every single day I worried about that. It's so funny. You should ask. No one's ever asked me that, and it's so true.
Yeah, I think we're all like that, right? When you have an idea, you're like, oh no. Publishers Weekly comes out every day. You're hoping not.
Right, you're racing. You're racing. Like, will the muse find someone else? And
I want to be the voice of dissent here, because I believe even if the muse finds someone else, you're two different artists. You could execute the exact same idea. The book will not be the same book. And a person who's interested in the topic may want to read both books. They may even seek those out.
That's a good way to think about it.
Yeah, and I think you don't give yourself the credit of how much you brought to this project, and the research and the energy and the fact that you chose to tell it novelistically, even though it's nonfiction. That's all you. That's your, that's all.
Thank you, Juliet.
I like that, Juliet.
Thank you.
So I was moved by all of your stories, and it seems like the life you've chosen as authors and artists has been a courageous choice for every single one of you. And so I'm curious about how often you are together, if you know each other, and how you support each other in this work, because it seems like challenging work.
Well, that's a great question.
So I host a series, and I've had the great pleasure of interviewing every single person on this stage for all of their books, and sometimes multiple times. And so I have always believed that a rising tide lifts all boats. My series, Mystery and Thriller Ravens, was a pandemic initiative that I started I volunteer my time. I do not make a penny off of it, but my whole goal is to support my fellow authors. And so every Monday night for #Mystery Monday, I interview a mystery and thriller author the night before their book comes out. And so I think one thing that I've noticed about the mystery and thriller community, having segued over from another genre, is that the folks here are very generous, and they aren't always in the other genres, but they are in this one, which is funny because we murder people on the page, but we're the most generous people, and the people who are writing other non-murdery books are more cutthroat and killer, if you know what I mean.
No, I mean, it's true. I think without each other, anything that happens, I mean, my first call is to my writer friends, and whether it's to complain about something, worry about something, they're there to be supportive. We all share each other's releases, we blurb each other. It's really the warmest community. I've made some of the best friends of my life. Right?
I'm very new. My first book came out a year ago, right?
It's only a year.
Just a year, November of
2023.
So, so when I joined Sisters in Crime in Connecticut, I was about to give up, and another author was like, "No, I read your book. You really need to go to Pitch Fest, which is this wonderful organization that the two of you are very involved with." And so for every level, like someone was like, "No, don't give up," and then I met Lynn, because we're both in Connecticut, who was like Mrs. Parrish, like I was scared to talk to her, and like so warm. And then Luann blurbed my first book, which I couldn't believe. Like when I found out and I got that email, and everyone I'm meeting, right now, even just getting to know Jean, because we shared the big suite this time, and with you, like, has been so supportive. But I mean, literally, Sarah had me on as a debut, like to help, boost me up and everything. So it is a community that helps and supports, and I think it would be impossible without that. Yeah. Like it can be a very lonely profession. So it's kind of amazing how supportive people are.
And picking up on what Sarah said, like the romance writers are the ones you have to watch out for. They're really scary.
You would think they would be the nice ones, but no, right? Yeah.
It's true. I work in publishing. It's true.
I heard that, yeah. The romance writers.
They're cutthroat.
They're scary. really scary.
And then there's someone over there, and then someone over here.
So you discussed, or you mentioned about having your story come to you and you had to get it out before someone else took it on. And I do very often hear about musicians and famous musicians hearing how they sort of almost channeled a song, like they didn't even make it up, it kind of came to them. Is that how you feel about your writing, that it kind of comes to you? And is that an ongoing thing, or is that just kind of what got you started in writing?
Me?
Well, any of you. Like, is that how writing is? Like, because I am not a writer, so
I think it
it's stressful for me.
I think I don't know, for me, some books seem to write themselves, very few. I mean, like The Last Mrs. Parrish, sometimes the characters come and you sort of know them, and then other times you might have, we might have an idea or, a theme we want to explore, but it takes a long time to get to know the characters. And I think, like anything else, it's a discipline. You can't wait for like the muse, or you'll never get anything done. So I'm very much in my office every day writing, and even if I don't feel like it, or I just know, okay, you have to write this certain amount, and if it's terrible, you'll fix it later. So that's sort of how I operate. But
I do feel like it's channeling channeling characters and then emotion. For me, a character comes to me, usually a woman of about my age with my concerns, you know, and it's not, and I don't go seeking it out. You know, and thriller writing is relatively new to me. I've written 3, and you know, so, but I do feel like even not, you know, general fiction is a thriller, because there's like so many secrets and trauma under one roof, you know, and so there's a lot of mystery to solve no matter what. But I always used to think, like, it comes out my fingertips. It's almost like it bypasses a certain part of my brain and just comes out, you know, here. If I had, you know, if I got knocked over the head, it would be better than if somebody injured my hand.
Don't take her fingers.
Exactly.
Yeah, that's.
I feel the same way, Luann. I feel that when I am in the flow, I'm a yoga teacher as well, so I'm a bit of a mystic. And when I am in the flow, the words flow effortlessly through my fingertips. But I still have to show up for the work. You know, I can't just be sitting at the beach without a notebook or, you know, a computer. Like I do feel, and sometimes, you know, the editing is not always flowing. You've got to be polishing it and thinking about word choice and pacing and narrative arc. And does that make sense for the character? And, you know, and could I cut some words, or could I be more efficient? Is every word lifting its weight? You know, did she walk? Did she run? Did she sauté? Did she strut? Did she stride? You know, let's think about the energy of that word and what does that convey and what does that say about her character, and let's be strategic about it. But am I channeling that character, and for me, a real life person? Yes, I am.
So Flaubert of you, le mot juste.
Well, I don't know. I mean, I think on a really good day, it's channeling, but it's also really a job.
Yes.
I mean, you know, it's to
show
write
up.
400 pages is a lot, and to have them be good, you really do. For those of you who might also want to be writers or are writing, it's not like you can sit down and you know what to do. I think it's a real combination of your heart and your brain trying to figure out how is this going to entertain the reader. I try to entertain and enlighten from beginning to the end. So I kind of hope to build a story that's going to suck you in and make you really excited to read to the end while talking about a lot of deeper themes. But that doesn't just come to me. Like, I'm not that smart, you know? It's like, I'm like, oh my God.
Physics at Harvard.
Oh God.
Sorry, you're not that smart. Simmer down, physics.
Can I just tell you,
Simmer down, Harvard.
Getting into Harvard is a piece of cake compared to becoming a writer. Like, really, compared to making it as a writer, no, it's really, really hard. It's like, it's really hard. It's really, really challenging. And, you know, people like live to reject you and to tell you you're bad, you know, and especially before you become well known. At a certain point, they know to back off a little bit. But like when you're starting, they're like, this is bad, this is bad, this is bad. You have no talent, you have no ability to do this. And you just kind of have to keep on believing in yourself.
But that's why
That's
why I read my bad reviews on Instagram. I love it.
You're getting bad reviews on Instagram?
No, I read my bad reviews.
Oh, two people. I know.
I put them up there.
I got an email. I mean, usually I get very nice emails, but one was like, oh, I read, you know, I loved The Last Mrs. Parrish, and I read The Wife Stalker. It really wasn't as good. Okay, well, thank you.
Put it up on Instagram.
I mean.
I got a letter from this guy on my debut novel, which is like, it's taught in schools. It's called Girl in Translation. It's taught in schools around the world. It has the honor of being banned across parts of America now. And this guy wrote to me and he said, I read your book and I wanted to boil my eyeballs in acid. And I was like, oh, thank you so much for reaching out and letting me know. And I was like, it was my debut. I was new, so I actually did respond to him, not in a defensive way, but in kind of, all right, well, thank you for letting me know. And then you know what he did? He showed up at one of my events with his book and asked me out to dinner. Guess what my answer was? You're dumping some acid, guy.
Ask him where to overnight the acid.
terrible.
Stalker.
And then somebody here.
All right. Hi. Thank you for all being here. I love just talking about stories, and it's really nourishing. And I work a lot during the week, so this is like very just like it's helping me feel very settled and happy. So I appreciate it. So my question is for Sarah specifically about I like how you were talking about your the history and the studying, and sort of you gave like a little tidbit of what happens. But I'm wondering if you could share like just a little bit about the story without giving anything big away. That's a little bit more than just like a beautiful woman in a lacy dress starting.
Yes. Yeah, so Dot King was a 29-year-old woman who told everyone that she was 27. And she was a woman who lived life on her own terms. So this was at a time when a woman went from her father's house to her husband's house, and women did not live alone. And some women, would live with a roommate, but even that was like, whoa, two women, living outside the protection of, a male spouse or father, whoa. And she lived alone. She drove a car. She owned a car. She made her own money. And with money comes power, because then she could buy things and she wasn't dependent on a man. And she just struck out on her own and developed a circle of friends that literally ran from the gangster underworld, the largest, most famous gangsters of the time. So Arnold Rothstein, Lucky Luciano, Legs Diamond, all of these fabulous, sort of 1920s gangsters, that ran with Al Capone, all the way up to literally the White House. These are the famous, wealthy, powerful people that walk the halls of power and privilege in our country, and she was hanging out with them. And she turned up dead. And there were a lot of people with a motive to kill her in all of those worlds. And so this is the woman who was murdered, but she, I don't want her to just be known by her victimhood. She was an empowered, powerful, fascinating woman. And the female reporter who covered her was, again, a pioneering journalist at the turn of the century. The detective who led the case was a first-generation Irish immigrant whose father was a cop in Ireland, and he worked his way up from from the Tenderloin district, a beat cop, all the way up to the head of detectives. He had 1,200 men reporting to him. And so, it's just such a fascinating cast of characters, but they all are real, live human beings.
Did the psychic tell you who killed her?
She gave me the initials of the person who killed her. Wow. And I knew, and the initials matched one of my suspects.
Oh, interesting.
Thank you. My question is, you're all successful authors. We all do things to make a living. And outside of that world, I'm sure you're out grocery shopping and pumping gas, going to the bank. Do you have instances where you observe behaviors of people when you're just living your ordinary life that inspire you to say, I'm going to write that into a character or anything of that nature?
100%
Yes.
of the time. If you ever have you see your friendly neighborhood author at a cafe and you go over to say hi and you sit down and they're so polite to you and they ask you some questions about, how are you? And then you find yourself talking for an hour and you are being harvested. Just to warn you. And that's why we don't have any friends except one another. And that's why we're so supportive to other writers.
It's actually so funny. Like, my husband, we spend half our time in Key West, and my husband is very into live music. And I like going to some of it, but like he wants to go to every concert. So I got to the point where I'm like, oh my God, like I can't listen to another thing. So I have my little earplugs, and then I have my phone out, and I'm just like looking at the cast of characters, especially in Key West, and just like taking notes. Okay, well, this person looks like this, or this person's like, because at some point you're like, oh my God, how am I going to describe another person, not with their hair color or this or that. So I'm like constantly taking notes, especially when I'm bored about something else.
What I think is really funny is that I think a lot of us, when we create our characters, they're kind of a conglomeration of people that we know in real life, only we change critical things. And I've gotten the question also, like, are people ever like, oh my God, I can't believe you wrote me in that way, or, you made him into such a villainous character. And I will say that in my experience, like, nobody ever thinks they're the villain. They all think they're like the hero or the heroine. And I regularly get, emails from people I may have dated in the past who are like, oh, Jean, I never knew you felt that way about me. And I'm like, who is this? I know you. Who is this?
That's really true. People always think they see themselves in our novels, but it's so funny that they don't think they're the villain. But I have to say, we have a wonderful book blog or bookstagrammer, Jessica, in the front row. And she is Sunshine's reading journey, very supportive to all writers and to readers. But her friend Jody, who's not here right now, who's read Read Reviews, we had dinner recently and she begged me to make her the murderer in the next book.
I can be the murdered person.
Oh yes, and Jessica will be the dead one.
Oh my God, I love it.
I personally have a lot of trouble coming up with names. So if anyone wants to volunteer their name, I need so many, but you may very well end up dead. I just have to.
That's what I miss about the phone books. That's what I used to, being on book tour, I used to go just sit there and read the phone book.
Just go to the baby names on the internet.
Names.
And that's what I do,
Yeah, that's what I do.
Thank you, everybody. You're all amazing. You have a true calling, and I just wanted to share a story. Luann knows this story. Luann, my sister, and I went to the same elementary school, and I wrote something in the school paper, and it was horrible. It was an interview, and I saved it for over 55 years. And when I went through pandemic, my paperwork, I saw the last page was this beautiful poem written by Luann Rice, and I think you were 6th grade. Or something like that, and then it went in the Harvard Current. You won a prize, and you were very talented even back then. So you all have a true calling.
Thank you. That's so cute. Thank you.
Thank you for sharing that, because look how generous moderator Luann was.
Yes.
She didn't talk about herself at all, and she was supposed to be a panelist today. So thank you for drawing attention.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you,
Thank you,
Luann.
Thank you all.
Thank you for joining us for this special broadcast of the Ocean House Authors Series with Deborah Goodrich Royce. Please tune in each month as we'll bring you a new Ocean House Authors Series highlighting nationally best-selling and award-winning authors in a salon-style conversation. Hosted by Ocean House owner, actress, and best-selling author Deborah Goodrich Royce. The WCRI is pleased to be partnering with the Ocean House to bring you this ongoing series highlighting the best and the brightest of the literary world. Thank you once again for joining us. And in the words of Margaret Atwood, in the end, we all become stories.